Hey there. At the request of Geo Unknown, I am making this video because I personally am, a self-described film buff. I love very odd, obscure movies. I have quite an expansive, not huge because they're expensive, but expansive Criterion collection. Basically, I like paying for those films because you're keeping them in print by paying for them, which is a good thing because a lot of these films go out of print. They don't have proper director's cut. They're fallen to obscurity, or like the fantastic movie Sorcerer, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. It just doesn't have that director's cut, and so it feels very choppy, and you don't get that full experience. So I would suggest investing in movies like Criterion Collection, but mind you, they're expensive. That's why I have only maybe like 15 of them, because $50 a pop, it adds up. But in any case, one of my favorite movies, as well as movie essays, is on Solaris by Andrei Tarkovsky, who, for one, he's an idol of mine. I find him a very profound guy. He's got this sense of like dharma to him, this serene, transcendent. His head's always in a higher frame of consciousness, and he very much loves ideas such as finding the profundity in isolation, overcoming ignorance, reliving memories, how memories change as we do. Very, very great director. He got a letter from Stanley Kubrick saying that he admired him very much, and Ingmar Bergman said that he was like the best of the best. And interestingly enough, Tarkovsky actually did not like A Space Odyssey, but I get into that in the essay, so I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah, this is my essay, so it's a little dramatic because that's how I am. So here we go. This is Solaris. Good golliness Molly, great googly moogly. Have you ever watched a film that made you feel drunk or like you're at the tail end of an acid trip? Like The Holy Mountain or Mulholland Drive? There's actually a phenomenon where the people who saw the movie I'll be covering today, Solaris, in theaters, during its premiere and ever since 1972, would actually find themselves overwhelmed by all the deliberately slow, rolling, lingering, drifting hypnotic shots that are most likely rich with subliminal details. They're so detailed and just meticulous in those details. And so there's this weighty, philosophically robust dialogue in the film, and those who beheld it have attested to there's a brain fog that would linger for days to come. Media-induced introspection, maybe? People seem to forget that it's even possible these days, and I can attest to this truth as the person I watched it with was just lost afterwards. We played chess and then watched it, and as the credits rolled, I asked them if, hey, did that blow your head off? And they couldn't even respond. They were just stammering. Finally stood up and went, I need to get out. I need to get out. I had to, oh, geez, that really did me in. And just left. So, I think this movie is antithetical. It's an antithetical solution to the faults of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Faults in 2001, you may ask? Where? How? The film's perfect, right? Well, I would have agreed with you last week, but after seeing the Tarkovsky version of Solaris, I've read Lem's novella too and saw the Soderbergh remake, and neither are anywhere near as profound as Tarkovsky's very loose adaptation. I'm now moved to think that 2001 misses the most crucial elements in any parable, modern or archaic, the human aspect. There's very little reverence for the beauty of humankind, no compassion, no outward ruminations on the nature of the universe or species. It's just a lot of really impressive shots, technology, and Tarkovsky himself actually hated 2001 for being sterile, quote, which is a reasonable conclusion if you ask me, as Space Odyssey is about as cold as an IBM computer. It's more about technology and evolution slash space expansion, which are all fascinating subjects when they're presented as impeccably as in 2001, but Solaris will impact you more viscerally in comparison. I think. That's what I say. Anywho, So they deliberately stress in Solaris how we don't need to colonize the universe. What our species needs is a mirror. Well, what the fuck does that mean, right? Well, if you ask me, it has to do with Tarkovsky's obsession with nostalgia and the imperfection of memory. No, the message is quite emphasized through by the thematic qualities of the film. We need to take a good, hard look at ourselves as a species and our mortal quarrels on this current planet so we can find unity instead of merely spreading a spiritually corroded species into the greater universe like a bunch of parasitic germs looking to conquer whatever we can get our hands on. Elon Musk, are you listening, buddy? But yeah, I think it's a very profound and just it resonates with truth, that idea. So yeah, it's a fair point, but that's only one of the many themes, and it arose from a single quote. So we're just getting started here. Whereas the book by Lem really seemed to push the idea that alien contact is something so beyond our current gauges that interacting with such a being like the living planet in Solaris is futile and pointless. A stark atheistic approach to Tarkovsky's adaptation, which is fair, but I found the novella just bashed me over the head with the concept. I mean, it was written in the USSR during the Cold War, so this was back when we thought sending radio waves was the best way to connect with other species, something that was not only frivolous, as radio signals take millions of years to really merely reach the armpits of the Milky Way. And if a response came, it would take millions of years for us to receive it. That being the case, if the response was broadcast using, radio frequencies, travel through space, but it should find out if we did travel through space and found a superior species. Words are hard. I apologize. And that superior species in turn finds us. We just advertised our potential demise / colonization. Tarkovsky seems to suggest numerous different notions. The next being the price paid for scientific progress. This is basically portrayed in a few occupants of the spacecraft that didn't kill themselves and who had been stricken by the appearance of the guests. Basically self-spawning organic apparitions lifted from the memory of the crew who emulate the form of someone they cherish or cherish. And Chris K. arrives and witnesses the depersonalization of the residents, two surviving scientists who are apathetic and seem distressed. Lost, and probably a metaphor for what Tarkovsky thinks logical thinking will lead us to. Just chaos and isolation from the spirit. And so Chris K, being a psychologist summoned by the distress call from his friend, the captain, days after they bombarded the titular Solaris with high-powered X-ray beams, only to find the captain dead from what is suggested to be a gruesome suicide. Chris naturally can't just go home, as the station is a one-way trip. It is, and it's in another solar system, so yeah, duh. So he starts to feel the guilt he has carried for many years, because he's in this sort of sensory vacuum. And his wife, Harry, killed herself after an argument by injecting herself with poison that Chris stored at his father's house. And he clearly has never forgiven himself for that, so he seeks to sort of stagger through life, so to speak, by just snuffing out anything remotely cerebral. That way he doesn't have to take on the emotional toll that retrospective meditation or trauma can cause, which is a natural part of any healing, session. And his existence is sort of put him in this feedback loop of regret and nostalgia. And who just so happens to appear? His wife. He proceeds to go through the 5 stages of grief in response. Denial. He thwarts her needy nature and takes advantage of her naivete, unwavering loyalty by ushering her into a rocket and claiming that they are going to escape together, but he quickly closes the hatch and blasts her into space. Sure enough, the cat came back the very next day. He proceeds to climb the grief ladder, when she bursts through the metal door, not wanting Kay to abandon her, as she just keeps manifesting as an apparition, regardless of what happens. And he expresses a frustrated disbelief in finding out that she has a self-replicating neutrino-based genome. And so he goes to stage 2, anger. He is told that there is a device that would completely annihilate her on a cellular level, but he bargains, 3rd stage of grief, with the team to let her stay. He then walks around in a depressed, stage 4, stupor, followed by this ideal version of his wife as she ruminates on the nature of her humanity and autonomy. And don't worry, I'll get into that aspect later in more detail. She proceeds to attempt suicide by drinking liquid nitrogen. The subtitles say liquid oxygen, but I'm pretty sure they meant nitrogen, and suffers as she eventually regenerates. And the organ damage, one can only speculate as to what that would do to a person, is just, it's gruesomely just reversed. Like, she has this reanimation where all her organs are repairing, just coughing the blood. Oh, it's brutal. So Chris is then told that the planet seems to have concentrated on him directly, and if they could beam the planet with his memories in a bid to break the deadlock and further our research, or they are just doing this to free themselves from their conscience that is being projected by Solaris, I don't know what the motivation is, but it's one of those two things. And soon one of the scientists, the cynical one, bears the bad news of his new wife destroying her form completely with the particle annihilator. This was presented through dialogue as her death was off-screen, an admittedly anticlimactic means of conveying such a... Sorry, I'm lost. Yeah, so an admittedly anticlimactic means of conveying such an imperative part of the narrative. But it's Tarkovsky, so this, I think, was intentional. I mean, grief, if you've experienced someone dying, it's very sudden. You know, you get a phone call and, oh, bang, this person's dead. I'm never going to talk to them again. So I think there was a reasoning to that. I mean, he had a 5-minute silent black and white scene of a car traveling to open the film with this deliberate attempt to bore people. So why wouldn't he try to break more cinematic conventions? And that's actually true. He said he wanted to make the first half of the movie boring, so the idiots would leave the theater, which I think is hilarious and a very Tarkovsky thing to do. So Tarkovsky. But yeah, so Chris eventually finds himself on an imperfect island meant to copy his father's property, where his wife, offed herself. He peers into the home, but something very uncanny is happening. The rain falls through the ceiling and onto his unfazed changeling of a father, and what is clearly an imperfect memory. It's a very chilling scene. And so knowing that he's doomed on Earth, Chris proceeds to non-verbally indicate his acceptance, stage 5 of grief. His new illusory home he takes on. And the stages of grief go full circle as he now denies the real world in favor of his new home, created by an amorphous yet sentient creature that has dubious motivations, to say the least. And it seems to suggest to me, anyhow, some malicious intent, or at least a disregard for human life, as the crew have all gone mad, died, lost faith, and Chris's pallor grows exponentially more and more gray and bruised, which implies that something is making him deteriorate. So the planet is essentially feeding off of him. I think what Tarkovsky is trying to say is that his trauma is eating him from the inside out. Whether this is a psychosomatic product of his own guilt, personal resentment, or the planet sucking his form dry, I don't know. But at the same time, he is transported to the island on Solaris. He is looking pretty rough, so I tend to think there's a parasitic nature to Solaris. I'm going to rewind here and go back to the debate about whether Harry, Chris's deeply affectionate, naive, and unerringly loyal, yet imperfect alien copy of a wife, is human. She at first displays a very dissociated countenance, blankly glaring around with either a 1,000-yard stare or desperate, somewhat scared countenance. And at first, she always clings to Chris like a child clutching a teddy bear. But one thing is for sure, she can't live without Chris, and I believe this is a reflection of how Chris couldn't live without her. Going back to the mirror here. So she develops a dependence on his presence that gradually sheds when she gains more self-awareness. Soon enough, she's interacting with the crew, and second-guessing her mortal form. Chris, having found the antidote to his stubborn, hopeless yearning for her, makes them overlook many of her anomalies, but she catches on as the scientists discuss some pretty profound concepts, predominantly the whole ignorance is bliss type of abstraction, but they describe the state more as sleep, and how sleep is imperative for human survival. Oh, don't worry, they'll get a paragraph soon. Now Harry is no longer sleepwalking. She knows of her existence, and in what I believe is a metaphor for their eventual separation, they both drift away from one another as the space station changes orbit and leaves them weightless for 30 seconds. Really impressive shot to pull off in 1972. Harry eventually becomes all too human while she tries to kill herself, as that was a fault in Kay's memory from which she is based, someone who is suicidal. Since she took this upon herself, it is abundantly clear that she has free will, and as far as Tarkovsky is concerned, this is a crucial human element. She self-destructs, but Solaris creates the next most favorable memory of Chris, his father's home. Now this begs the question, is the island with his father, the house, and the pond all human too? His father doesn't speak and just lets water pour on him, so that seems to suggest that the replications are either imperfectly human, or that they are far from human, and just a means of manipulating Chris into staying. So Chris, that's these are the human elements of the film. But what about Solaris itself? What the fuck is it? In the book, it is described as a planet covered in gelatinous waves that form in a manner which defies the laws of our natural universe. In the Soderbergh adaptation, it seems to be an electric sea that had a rather intriguing glow, but is obviously just CGI, the lowest denominator out of the novel. In the 1972 film, and the Soderbergh one. In the context of Tarkovsky's version, it maintains this description outlined in the book that are all produced with just stunning practical effects, and it moves in a deeply unnerving way. The pilot is the first to describe his experience prior to Chris's travel to the station when he flew over the planet and he encountered a fog, a garden on the ocean's surface, and an 8-foot-tall baby-like being. I really like that they didn't show us this, as the description elicits some pretty creepy renderings of what we just saw. Or what he saw, sorry. And the properties exhibited by Solaris are so profoundly unusual that the top brass on planet Earth have directed all the best scientific minds on the nature of Solaris to a study called Solaristics. I'm not going to go too far in what Solaris could represent. It is mostly emblematic of the emotional escape pragmaticism provides, but Tarkovsky turns it into something that, like a mirror, which I think is what it's supposed to be, reflects the faults of the space station's occupants. Everything they're holding inside themselves, this internal struggle that they just do not address and do not open up about. And so it puts them all into this distant state as they don torn clothes, try to hide the paranormal activity they experience. The only apparition we see is Harry, as the story is from Chris's perspective, but we do see poltergeist phenomenon in Snout's room as his hammock swings on its own in the background. And the scientists desperately keep his room sealed, but something on the other side starts hammering on the door. That handle the scientist is clutching with such fervor because he doesn't want his secrets to get out. He doesn't want his mirror to show what's going on inside him. And Solaris could also represent how space travel would merely make our species even more isolated from one another than ever before. But anyways, yeah, so now Solaris is rife with profound meditations on the nature of humanity, like any Tarkovsky film, and our place in the cosmos, as well as, I could go on and on and on. These are heavy topics, and they are really exhausting to expound upon, so I'll leave you with this quote from Comrade Snout. We don't need to colonize space. What we need is a mirror. And, that's my video essay on Solaris. And, Tarkovsky is really, one of my favorite directors, if not my favorite. I have Solaris, I have Andrei Rublev. Stalker is my favorite film, and it inspired one of my favorite video game series, personally. So, anyways, this is a little bit different, and, I pretty much described all the thematic elements as well as the plot of Solaris. But I think you are missing out if you do not watch it, the 1972 version, because there are so many scenes that are just, rich with these powerful aesthetic, for example, the sets are just so alien and so bizarre, and they seem so, isolated and unpopulated and just devoid of human love, and it's very profound, and the score is chilling, as always in Tarkovsky films. The design for the planet is amazing, these just slow, gelatinous waves going. Oh man, it is great. I love it, and it will actually you'll feel high after the movie. Trust me. So yeah, check it out. Anyways, I can do more video essays if you want. But just let me know. Synthetic, fucking spiritual, not so spiritual. Sorry. Saying goodbye to you.